The disappearance of flight MH370 is one of the biggest mysteries in modern aviation history.
In this video, we're diving into the unknown, planes that vanished without a trace, ghost ships drifting with no crew, and eerie clues that still leave experts scratching their heads.
MT-28, this is FT-74. What is your trouble?
Both my compasses are out and I'm trying to find Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
If you think you've heard it all, think again and get ready for some of the strangest disappearances ever recorded.
Survivors of a plane crash in the Chilean Andes. The plane went down 10 weeks ago. The 45 people aboard were given up for dead.
We're still turning! Level, baby, level! Brace, brace, brace!
On May 25th, 1979, American Airlines Flight 191, a DC-10. The plane experienced a serious incident shortly after taking off from Chicago's O'Hare Airport. The aircraft lost power to one of its engines during takeoff. Despite the pilot's efforts to manage the emergency, the plane began banking sharply to the left and quickly lost altitude. Witnesses watched in horror as the plane turned on its side, spiraling towards the ground. It crashed into an airport hangar and was caught up in flames in a short moment. A total of 271 people were on board, but no survivors were reported, marking the largest aviation disaster in U.S. history at the time. The strike also posed a severe risk to people on the ground, particularly those in a nearby trailer park.
Look at this. Look at this. Equipment. I need equipment. He blew an engine.
Helios Airways Flight 522.
Helios 522 turning sharply.
Helios 522. Do you read? Over.
Helios Flight 522's story is one of aviation's darkest moments. After losing cabin pressure at cruising altitude, most of the passengers and crew lost consciousness, leaving the plane to fly on autopilot. Greek fighter jets were sent to intercept, but attempts to communicate with the silent aircraft failed. The fighter pilots saw a slumped figure in the co-pilot's seat and unresponsive passengers, but hope briefly flickered when they noticed some movement in the cockpit. But still, there was no response. The plane eventually went down near Athens, with no survivors reported. The incident left Cyprus in mourning and the world questioning how safety systems and human error played a role in this haunting incident.
One of them was actually in a shooting position behind the 737. The other one was nearby the cockpit and he was trying to communicate visually with the person in the cockpit.
Egypt Air Flight 990. On October 31st, 1999, Egypt Air Flight 990 took off from JFK Airport, headed for Cairo with 217 people on board. Everything seemed normal until the plane suddenly dove after leveling off over the Atlantic. In the cockpit, a voice could be heard crying, "I rely on God."
I rely on God.
Just before the aircraft plunged to near supersonic speeds, causing a devastating outcome. The plane crashed into the ocean 60 miles off the U.S. coast, and no survivors were reported. Investigations looked into whether a mechanical failure or human intent was to blame, but the cause remains unclear. The terrible loss of Flight 990 continues to haunt aviation history. Titanic of the skies.
Dakar for Air France. Have you heard from Air 447? Over.
Negative. Hold for Air France, please.
On May 31st, 2009, Air France Flight 447 took off from Rio de Janeiro, heading toward Paris with 228 people on board. It began as a routine flight with captain, first officer, and relief pilot controlling the aircraft. They were cruising at the height of 35,000 feet above the Atlantic when the plane lost its signals, and just hours into the journey, the plane literally vanished from radar, entering a communication blackout. Despite efforts by Senegalese air traffic control to reach the aircraft, there was no response. As time passed and the flight failed to arrive in Paris, the world learned of the tragedy. Air France Flight 447's disappearance remains one of the most saddening losses in aviation.
Air France 447, this is Dakar. Do you copy? Come in, Air France 447.
Emergency landing.
Years before Captain Sully and the Miracle on the Hudson, there was Captain Schornsteimer and the miracle landing of Aloha Flight 243 on Maui after a huge section of the fuselage ripped off in midair.
On April 28, 1988, Aloha Airlines Flight 243 faced a nightmare mid-flight. The plane, flying from Hilo to Honolulu, suddenly made a loud noise, and the top of the Boeing 737 seemed to break apart. Passengers looked out and saw the ocean far below as the plane's structure started to shake. The flight attendants worked quickly, trying to keep everyone calm as the plane began to fall. It was a scary moment, but the crew did their best to make sure the passengers were safe. Despite the chaos, the captain and first officer stayed calm. Their quick thinking helped guide the plane to an emergency landing at Kahului Airport. Amazingly, all 89 passengers survived. The cause was traced back to cracks in the plane caused by metal fatigue, which led to major changes in aviation safety procedures.
From what I gathered, talking to people afterwards, a few people saw her trying to grab the intercom, maybe to tell them what to do.
The Flight 19.
What is your compass reading, Powers? I don't know where we are. Must have gotten lost after that last turn.
MT-28, this is FT-74. What is your trouble?
Both my compasses are out, and I'm trying to find Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
On December 5th, 1945, 5 TBM Avenger planes set off from Fort Lauderdale on a routine training mission, but Flight 19 never made it back. The pilots faced confusion, compass failures, and a growing sense of disorientation. Despite some pilots trying to turn west, conflicting decisions pulled them further into the unknown. Recent research by aviation analysts revisited the Navy's report, suggesting that wind drift and compass issues led the pilots off course. Radar tracked the planes heading south, but fuel ran out, and the flight disappeared without a trace. The mystery of Flight 19 remains unsolved, continuing to fuel speculation and its connection to the Bermuda Triangle's mysterious legend.
We've just passed over a small island, and we have no other land in sight.
Turn on your emergency IFF gear, or do you have it on?
IFF gear was off. I'm turning it on now.
Titanic. On April 10, 1912, the Titanic began its maiden voyage, capturing the world's attention. This massive ship was 269 meters long and 53 meters tall, with luxurious features like heated pools, a gym, and fancy dining rooms. It was thought to be unsinkable, designed with advanced safety features and watertight compartments. Over 2,200 passengers and crew were on board, including the rich and famous. Despite warnings about icebergs, the ship sailed full speed ahead. On the night of April 14th, disaster struck. The Titanic hit an iceberg, creating a huge hole. In just a few hours, the supposedly unsinkable ship sank, shocking the world and becoming one of the most tragic events in history. Uruguayan Air Force flight.
Survivors of a plane crash in the Chilean Andes. The plane went down 10 weeks ago. The 45 people aboard were given up for dead.
In 1972, something unbelievable happened. A group of 16 young men survived a plane crash in the freezing Andes, and they were stranded there for more than 2 months. The crash had torn the plane apart, and with no food in sight, they were forced to make terrifying decisions in order to save lives. Despite the freezing cold and constant challenges, their courage and teamwork saw them through. Their incredible story was portrayed in films like Society of the Snow. Years later, those who lived to tell the tale shared a powerful message. Don't wait for a tragedy to remind you to cherish your loved ones or chase your dreams. Their survival journey still inspires us, showing the true strength and resilience of the human spirit. SS Edmund Fitzgerald.
No more sunlight can penetrate through Lake Superior.
The sinking of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald is one of the worst accidents in the history of the Great Lakes. Rick Mixture, a maritime historian from Michigan, recounts his scary experience visiting the wreck site in Lake Superior, 530 feet below the surface. Alongside a small crew, Mixture dove down in a submersible and discovered weird remnants of the ship. They found a blanket hanging from a window, and the prow of the ship was bent after sinking into the lake's bottom. The most haunting discovery, however, was the body of a missing crew member, still wearing his life vest. Mixture's exploration in 2004 left a deep impression on him, and he plans to return for the 50th anniversary in 2025. British Airways 009.
Place for me to spend a few hours. Wouldn't mind being there myself.
In 1982, British Airways Flight 9 was cruising over Indonesia when everything took a terrifying turn. Passengers were suddenly overwhelmed by thick smoke filling the cabin, and strange lights flickered outside. As panic set in, the plane's engines made loud noises.
Fire engulfs the engines.
One by one, the unimaginable happened. All 4 engines failed.
All 4 engines have failed.
And the massive 747 began falling through the sky. With no power and no clear answers, the crew was left scrambling to keep control. Despite the odds, the team managed to glide the plane to safety, landing at a nearby airport. The remarkable survival of everyone on board became a testament to the crew's skill and determination in the face of mishap.
What's going on? What's the problem?
It's just a technical fault. I've been through much worse, let me tell you. Everything will be fine.
TWA Flight 800.
Pretty alarming for an air traffic controller. So they tried to contact them, and then they were asking for nearby airplanes to tell us what was going on.
On a hot summer night, July 17, 1996, TWA Flight 800 took off from JFK Airport, bound for Rome with a stop in Paris. With 230 people on board, the flight seemed routine. But just 12 minutes after takeoff, it vanished from radar. Air traffic controllers and nearby pilots saw a massive boom in the sky, followed by debris falling into the ocean. The wreckage was recovered, and investigations pointed to a fuel tank outburst caused by faulty wiring. The NTSB suggested an electrical spark triggered the incident, but the exact cause remained unclear. Despite this, suspicions of terrorism lingered.
Perhaps there was a terrorist involvement.
Years later, the wreckage was destroyed, offering bittersweet closure, but the true cause of the crash remains a mystery.
The inescapable conclusion
that the cause of the in-flight breakup of TWA Flight 800 was a fuel-air explosion in the center wing tank.
SS Kamloops shipwreck. The SS Kamloops sank in December 1927 near Isle Royale, Michigan, in an accident. The wreck was found in 1977 at a depth of 200 to 270 feet. The ship had a variety of goods on board, like lifesavers, toothpaste, and shoes, which were preserved by the cold water of Lake Superior. Sadly, no one survived the sinking. Some who reached shore gave in to the cold. One stewardess wrote a final message in a bottle which was found in the wreckage, a reminder of this catastrophe. Stardust. On March 10, 1956, a U.S. military Boeing B-47 Stratojet took off from MacDill Air Force Base in Florida, heading to Morocco. The plane had 3 crew members on board and needed 2 refuels to make the trip. The first one went fine, but the second one over the Mediterranean turned weird. The tanker made contact with the B-47, but as the plane descended through some clouds to refuel, it just disappeared. What made this even more intense was that the B-47 was carrying 2 capsules with material for a nuclear weapon. While it wasn't a risk on its own, if the wreckage was found, it could be a threat. To this day, no one knows what happened to the plane or the crew, and it's hoped the wreckage is sitting at the bottom of the sea. Flying Tiger Line. On March 14, 1962, Flying Tiger Line Flight 739 took off from Travis Air Force Base in California, carrying 93 U.S. soldiers, including 3 Vietnamese troops and 11 crew members on a classified mission tied to the early Vietnam War. The plane, a Lockheed Super Constellation, was supposed to make several refueling stops on its way to Saigon, but somewhere between Guam and the Philippines, the aircraft disappeared without a trace. Despite an extensive search covering over 200,000 square miles, no trace was ever found. The disappearance of Flight 739 remains one of aviation's greatest mysteries that no one could answer. 60-year-old mystery.
It appeared that there had been an attempt at ditching of the plane. and that the ditching would have been almost survivable, except that the plane came in at too steep an angle and at too high a speed.
In 1957, Pan Am Flight 7 disappeared on its way from San Francisco to Hawaii, with 44 people on board. The Boeing Stratocruiser was known for its luxury, complete with gourmet meals and champagne, but it vanished without a trace. Days later, wreckage was found far off course. There were no signs of fire or distress calls, but strangely, high traces of carbon monoxide were found in some of the passengers. Theories about a meteor, explosion, or mechanical failure emerged, but no one could explain what really happened. Amelia Earhart.
The disappearance of female pilot Amelia Earhart during her round-the-world air voyage back in 1937.
In 1937, Amelia Earhart and her navigator, Fred Noonan, disappeared during an attempt to fly around the world. Their plane vanished over the Pacific Ocean near Howland Island, leaving behind one of the greatest mysteries in aviation history. For decades, the world searched in vain for answers. Now, after all these years, a recent sonar scan has revealed an object 16,000 feet underwater near Howland Island. Some believe it could be Earhart's Lockheed Electra, based on its tail shape and design. While some experts are hopeful, caution remains until the site is fully explored. If confirmed, this discovery could finally bring closure to a mystery that has lasted nearly 90 years, giving the world the answers it's been waiting for.
I landed there after frightening all the cows in the neighborhood and rolled up to the farmer's front door.
Mystery of Flight 777. In June 1943, Flight 777A got down over the Bay of Biscay, and 13 passengers didn't make it through this, including a Hollywood star. The incident remains shrouded in mystery, with conflicting theories. Some believe the Germans mistakenly targeted the flight, thinking the British Prime Minister was aboard. Others suggest the real target was Howard, who had secretly worked as an agent for the British government during World War II. The intrigue deepens with the possibility that British intelligence may have known about the strike, but allowed it to happen. Was it a failed assassination attempt on the PM, or a covert operation to take out Howard? The unanswered questions keep this wartime mystery alive, captivating those fascinated by espionage and secret wartime efforts. Eastern Airline Flight 401.
Charger Eastern 401, just turned on final. Eastern 401 heavy, continue approach to 9 left.
Continue approach, roger.
On board American Airlines Flight 191 were 163 passengers, 10 cabin crew members, and 3 pilots. Captain, a seasoned pilot with 29,700 hours, was in charge, though he had only 280 hours on the new TriStar aircraft. First officer, with 5,800 hours, and flight engineer, with 15,700 hours, completed the crew. After performing their usual pre-flight checks, they took off for Miami at 21:20 EST. During the flight, the crew became distracted by a minor issue, a burnt-out light bulb. While attempting to resolve it, they failed to notice the autopilot had disengaged, causing the plane to slowly descend. They didn't realize their altitude loss in time, leading to a collision in the Everglades, which claimed 101 people and highlighted the need for better crew communication and focus on critical tasks.
It's gotta be a faulty light. Doug, this damn thing just won't come out. All right, just leave it there.
Mysterious disappearance.
First observation, now that I'm up here, this instrumentation pretty much looks like what it looked like in 1950.
Yes, it does. We don't have a big screen to tell us exactly where we're at all the time. We still use a navigation chart.
Right. And Northwest 2501, when these guys are navigating across the country, they're not being tracked in real time, right? By radar.
In 1950, Northwest Flight 2501 vanished over Lake Michigan with 55 passengers and 3 crew members on board. The flight was traveling from New York to Minneapolis when it flew into a massive storm. The pilots requested a lower altitude to avoid turbulence, but suddenly lost contact. A search was launched, but no wreckage was found for years. The mystery of what happened remains unsolved. Some believe severe wind or turbulence may have struck the plane, causing it to crash into the lake. Today, only a few planes like the DC-4 still fly, serving as a scary reminder of how threatening air travel once was. The disappearance of Flight 2501 continues to haunt aviation history. Southern Airways Flight 932. Southern Airways Flight 932 was smacked in November 1970, taking 75 people in it, including members of the Marshall University football team, coaches, and boosters. The plane was just moments away from its destination in West Virginia when a series of miscommunications and faulty altitude readings led to a catastrophe. Despite the crew's experience, weather conditions and a malfunctioning autopilot played a significant role. The incident deeply impacted the community, with families mourning their loss and Marshall University even contemplating the end of its football program. Today, a memorial fountain at the university stands as a tribute to those who perished in this calamity. Air collision. The terrible mid-air collision over North Carolina remains one of the most lethal in history. On that day, 82 lives didn't make through, including the Navy secretary and his family. Witnesses saw a small Cessna collide with a Piedmont Airlines Boeing 727, about 4,000 feet above Hendersonville. The Cessna had just reported its position, approaching Asheville, when calamity struck. Despite air traffic controllers' efforts to prevent the collision, the two aircraft collided, leading to the destruction of the Cessna and the devastating descent of the Boeing 727. Investigations into the collision focused on flight records and voice tapes, and the incident led to calls for stricter regulations on small planes at commercial airports. Ghost blimp. In 1942, residents of Daly City were shocked to see a U.S. Navy blimp, L-8, descending alarmingly low. It scraped rooftops and telephone poles before finally landing in the street in front of a home. However, there was no sign of the crew. The blimp had been on a routine patrol to track Japanese submarines, but something went wrong, and it changed direction off course. Despite extensive search efforts, the two men aboard, lieutenant, were never found. Their mysterious disappearance has never been explained, and the incident remains one of aviation's unsolved mysteries. D.B. Cooper. In 1971, a man known as D.B. Cooper boarded a plane from Portland to Seattle, handed a note to a flight attendant, and calmly explained that he had a plan. After receiving a briefcase full of money and parachutes, he let the passengers go and ordered the crew to take off again. Somewhere over the Pacific Northwest, he opened the rear door and disappeared into the night. Despite decades of searching, no one knows what happened next. Some believe he escaped and started a new life, while others think the wilderness proved too challenging. A few clues, like some scattered bills from the ransom, have surfaced, but the full story remains one of the greatest mysteries in aviation history. Mary Celeste.
The sails were damaged. Those that were up and had not been furled were damaged. Aside from that, there was no real structural damage to the boat.
In November 1872, during a heavy storm in the Atlantic, the Mary Celeste was found drifting with no crew on board. The ship was intact, with supplies for 6 months and only some torn sails. But the captain, his family, and the crew were missing without a trace. Many theories have been suggested about what happened to them, but none have been proven. Recently, new investigations and the discovery of a lost log are shedding light on this mystery, bringing fresh hope of solving the case that has fascinated people for over a century.
They seem to be navigating their way fairly accurately throughout the voyage earlier on, and suddenly there's a deviation to the north.
Unexplained disappearance. The SS Waratah was a large, modern ship considered unsinkable when it vanished in 1909. On a routine journey, it disappeared after passing another vessel. The ship was designed to carry hundreds of passengers and tons of cargo, but despite extensive searches and countless theories, ranging from explosions to paranormal events, no wreckage or survivors were ever found. Its disappearance made everyone confused. Over the years, many queries have remained unanswered, making the mystery of the SS Waratah one of the greatest maritime enigmas. The story still sparks curiosity and captures the imagination of those intrigued by unsolved mysteries. Lost HMS Terror.
HMS Terror, the last missing ship of the doomed Franklin expedition, has finally been found.
We're diving into the remarkable discovery of the HMS Terror, the last missing ship from the doomed Franklin expedition. After more than 170 years, the ship was finally found in the icy waters of Nunavut, Canada. Local fishermen noticed a piece of wood that led researchers to the site. The images of the ship are incredible, with its mast still standing and items like wine bottles and plates perfectly preserved. This discovery opens up new questions about the Franklin expedition's fate and what might have happened to the Terror after it was abandoned.
It is perfectly preserved, and it will just ring the same sound it did 160-some years ago.
MV Joyita. The story of the MV Joyita is one that still leaves people confused. This 69-foot wooden ship was built in 1931 and had a fascinating history, once owned by a Hollywood director and later the U.S. Navy. In 1955, Captain Thomas Dusty Miller sailed the Joyita from Samoa to the Tokelau Islands, but it never reached its destination. When the ship was found on November 10th, it was adrift, hundreds of miles off course, with no sign of the crew or passengers. There were strange clues left behind, stained bandages and a radio set to a distress signal. Many theories have been suggested, from a medical emergency to a potential crime, but no one knows for sure what happened to the Joyita and its people. What do you think? 1980 shipwreck.
Look at that.
17 years after the terrifying sinking of the Derbyshire, investigators are finally getting closer to understanding what happened. Using a remote camera, they explored the wreckage deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, over 2 miles underwater. What they found was shocking. The ship, once the largest British cargo ship, had broken into over 2,000 pieces. This wasn't caused by an explosion at first, but rather an implosion from the ship's double hull. As the ship sank, the water pressure caused the hulls to collapse inward, which created a powerful shockwave, scattering the wreckage. While the exact cause of the implosion is still unclear, these findings reveal just how big the calamity was.
So the wreckage on the seafloor was just huge pieces of ship twisted by energy that just is almost impossible to imagine.
USS Cyclops. The disappearance of the USS Cyclops in 1918 is one of the biggest mysteries of the Bermuda Triangle. With 309 people aboard, it holds the record for the largest unexplained loss of life on a U.S. Navy ship. The Cyclops was transporting fuel during World War I and was last seen leaving Barbados on March 4th, 1918. After that, it vanished without a trace. No wreckage or signs were ever found, and despite a huge search, the ship was never seen again. One idea is that a huge rogue wave might have hit the ship, causing it to sink quickly. While some blame the Bermuda Triangle, the true cause of its disappearance remains unknown. Sinking of Andrea Doria. On the night of July 25th, 1956, the Andrea Doria, a beautiful Italian ocean liner, sailed through the rough Atlantic seas. Passengers relaxed, enjoying their meals and the journey, completely unaware of the catastrophe that was about to strike. Near Nantucket, disaster hit when the Andrea Doria collided with another ship. The collision caused a huge hole in its hull, and the ship started to sink. What followed, though, was an extraordinary rescue effort. Despite the calamity, hundreds of lives were saved, turning what could have been a tragic end into an incredible story of survival. The Andrea Doria will always be remembered for this remarkable moment in maritime history. MV Dona Paz. The Dona Paz mishap on December 20th, 1987 marked one of the fatal peacetime maritime tragedies in history. The ferry, overcrowded with an estimated 3,000 passengers, more than double its capacity, collided with the MT Vector, a tanker carrying highly flammable fuel, in the Tabla Strait. The explosion that followed engulfed both vessels in flames. Many passengers jumped into the sea, but couldn't take on the boiling water temperature, while others were trapped in the ferry. Only 24 passengers survived, along with 2 crew members from the Vector. The aftermath revealed serious safety failures, like overcrowding, understaffed crews, and outdated equipment, highlighting the risks of poor safety standards. Into cursed waters.
We've done a lot of deep dives. We've done a lot of dives that are far offshore. This is the combination of both of them. It is basically a pretty crazy dive to be trying to accomplish.
A team of wreck hunters set out on one of their most threatening dives yet. The wreck was 400 feet deep in the Bermuda Triangle, far from shore. The ship they were after had vanished in 1963, leaving only small pieces of wreckage behind. When they reached the wreck site, they found a huge structure lying on the ocean floor, as big as a skyscraper. As they got closer, they saw it looked mostly intact, but had a clear impact, possibly from an ignition. The team tried to explore deeper, but the risk was too high. After checking old records, they realized the wreck was from World War II. The mystery was finally solved.
Both were operating in this area, and both were victims of U-507.
The ghost ship? In the late 1940s, an SOS signal came from the SS Angman, a ship drifting in Indonesian waters. When rescuers arrived, they were shocked to find the entire crew were lifeless, their bodies frozen in fear, with no signs of injury. Even the ship's dog was found in the same strange condition. As the team looked for answers, a fire suddenly broke out on the ship, forcing them to pull back. Before they could figure out what was going on, the ship blew up and sank into the ocean, taking its secrets with it. The wreck disappeared, and to this day, no one knows what happened to the crew. USS Scorpion. The disappearance of the USS Scorpion is one of the most mysterious events in naval history. In May 1968, the nuclear-powered submarine vanished during a mission in the Mediterranean. Despite a huge search effort, the ship and its crew were never found. The Navy couldn't figure out exactly what caused the loss, with theories ranging from mechanical failure to sabotage. This incident raised concerns about the safety of submarines, especially during repairs. To this day, the mystery of the Scorpion remains unsolved. What do you think about it? The mystery of El Faro. On October 1st, 2015, the El Faro, an American cargo ship, sent out a distress call near the Bahamas. Caught in Hurricane Joaquin, the ship was in trouble. It soon vanished, and all 33 crew members were feared lost. Investigators later found out the ship's engine failed, and attempts to fix it didn't work. The ship was on its way from Florida to Puerto Rico when it encountered the hurricane. Despite search efforts, the El Faro was eventually found sunk, marking a terrible event in U.S. maritime history. The Flying Dutchman.
Sailors didn't like the Cape Coast at all. There was no natural harbors where one could hide from storms or anything.
The southern tip of Africa is known for fierce storms, and it's also where the mystery of the Flying Dutchman began. This ghost ship is said to haunt sailors, especially near the Cape of Storms. The legend tells of Captain Willem van der Decken, a Dutch sailor who got stuck in a terrible storm and never made it to port. Since then, people have reported seeing a glowing ghost ship, even as recently as 1941. The Flying Dutchman is still a mystery, a cursed ship doomed to sail forever.
Ideal city for the legend of the Flying Dutchman.
SS Bannockburn. The Canadian freighter Bannockburn was loading grain at Port Arthur on the day before its tragedy. The ship, built in 1893 in England, was about to carry 85,000 bushels of wheat across Lake Huron. Captain, a young but experienced navigator, led the crew, most of whom were also young. Though it was his first season on the ship, the crew was ready for the journey. However, signs of bad weather were already showing, with ice forming on the shore, warning them that the season was coming to an end. Mysterious shipwreck. In 2016, a group of divers was exploring Lake Superior when they discovered an old shipwreck lying beneath the water. The ship looked perfectly preserved, but it was clear it had been there for a very long time. The divers found lots of old items, but they couldn't figure out the full story behind the ship. It was as if the boat had been lying there forever, hidden in the depths of the lake. The mystery of when and how it sank still remains unsolved. USS Grunion.
The first underwater video of a submarine that's been missing since World War II.
After 65 years, the mystery of the missing USS Grunion was finally solved. The submarine vanished in 1942 during World War II, and its wreck was discovered deep in Alaskan waters. A Japanese historian found an old account of the Grunion's final battle, which helped lead to its location. The submarine was on the surface when it was struck. Brothers of the submarine's captain had spent decades searching. When they found the wreck, an open hatch and a trail on the sea floor revealed the tragic end. Finally, the families found closure.
One letter he said, "Parting is such sweet sorrow." And he said, "I'd like to ask the person that wrote that, what's so sweet about it?"
Abandoned in ice. In the fall of 1931, the Baichimo got stuck in thick ice, facing storms and freezing temperatures. By October, Captain and his crew were stranded, running low on coal. They had to leave the ship and stay in Barrow, Alaska. But when they returned, the Baichimo had broken free, only to be stuck again. The crew kept up maintenance through the winter, hoping for spring. But a storm in November shifted the ship, and it was found impacted near Skull Cliff. The crew finally had to abandon her, knowing the ship wouldn't survive. MV Lyubov Orlova. A strange video appeared showing a man walking around in a ship with no one else inside. The ship in the video was the MV Lyubov Orlova. This was a cruise ship built in 1976 in Yugoslavia, mainly used for Antarctic trips. After being retired in 2010, it sat in St. John's, Newfoundland for 2 years. When it was finally decommissioned, things went wrong, and by 2013, the ship became a floating wreck in the North Atlantic. It's believed to have eventually sunk, but its mysterious video still remains. And now, let us move on to our subscriber pick of the day. On March 8, 2014, Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 took off for Beijing with 227 passengers. Everything seemed fine until the plane lost contact over the South China Sea. The aircraft's transponder went silent, and military radar tracked it, changing the direction. Despite months of searching, no wreckage was found. A clue later showed the plane flew for hours after losing contact, leaving the mystery of MH370 unsolved.